The Jacobite Rising of 1745 was the attempt by Charles Edward Stuart to regain the British throne for the exiled House of Stuart. The rising occurred during the War of the Austrian Succession, when most of the British army was on the European continent. Charles Edward Stuart, commonly known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, or the Young Pretender, sailed to Scotland and raised the Jacobite standard at Glenfinnan in the Scottish Highlands, where he was supported by a gathering of Highland clansmen. The march south began with an initial victory at Preston Pans near Edinburgh. The Jacobite army, now in bold spirits, marched onwards to Carlisle, over the border in England. When it reached Derby, some British divisions were recalled from the continent and the Jacobite army retreated north to Inverness, where the last battle on Scottish soil took place on a nearby moor at Culloden. The Battle of Culloden ended with the final defeat of the Jacobite cause, and with Charles Edward Stuart fleeing with a price on his head, before finally sailing to France. Background: the Glorious Revolution of 1688–89 resulted in the Roman Catholic Stuart king, James II of England and 7 of Scotland, fleeing to exile in France under the protection of Louis XIV. James' daughter and her husband, who was also James's nephew, ascended the British throne as joint sovereigns William and Mary. In 1690, Presbyterianism was established as the state religion of Scotland. The Act of Settlement 1701 settled the succession of the English throne on the Protestant House of Hanover. The Scottish Act of Security 1704 required that Queen Anne's successor be Protestant, and the Act of Union 1707 applied the Act of Settlement to Scotland. With the death of Queen Anne in 1714, the Elector of Hanover, George I, succeeded to the British throne. James II's son, James Francis Edward Stuart, the Old Pretender, attempted to gain the British throne in 1715 but failed to do so. The accession of George I ushered in the Whig supremacy, with the Tories deprived of all political power. George II succeeded his father in 1727. Thereafter, the Whig Henry Pelham was Prime Minister until 1754. In 1743, war broke out between Britain and France, as part of the larger War of the Austrian Succession. Later that year, Francis Semple, James Francis Edward Stuart's representative at the French court, carried a message from English Tories to the French Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs requesting French help in a Stuart restoration. It was signed by the Duke of Beaufort, Lord Barrymore, Lord Orrery, Sir Watkin Williams-Wynne, Sir John Hine Cotton and Sir Robert Abdy. Amelot replied that the French government would need considerable proof of English support for Jacobitism before it could act. The Tory leaders had requested 10,000 French soldiers and arms for 10,000 of the officers on half-pay and unemployed soldiers. The French were to land in Malden in Essex, a section of coast not patrolled by the Royal Navy, obviating a crossing of the River Thames and counting on support from Jacobite sentiment there. They advised that Maurice of Saxony should command the French army because he was personally known to most of them and was a Protestant. A parallel expeditionary force for a Scottish landing under the command of Lord Marischal was requested as well. These plans were kept secret from James Francis Edward Stuart and the Duke of Ormond and known only to the 6 Tory leaders and to Sir John Street, Auburn, Sir William Carew, Sir Henry Slingsby, John Baptist Carroll, Charles Grey, Samuel Saville, Thomas Burney Bramston, Henry Reed, and Sir Edward Smith. James Butler, Louis XV's a master of horse, toured England ostensibly for purchasing bloodstock, but in reality to gauge the health of Jacobitism in England. Before he left for England, the French king briefed him personally to assure the Tory leaders that all of their demands would be met. In early August, Butler arrived in London and met with 20 to 30 members of the Corporation of London and had private talks with Robert, Willie Mote, Robert Westley, George Heathcote, Edward Gibbon, William Benn and Daniel Lambert. He reported back that they showed great zeal for a revolution. A list of the corporation's members given to Butler showed that out of 236 members, 176 were listed as Jacobite patriots, and Butler was also told that the recent loss of court control of the city of Westminster was due to the independent electors' attachment to their rightful king. John Sample, a spy for Walpole, told the Duke of Newcastle that plans for a French invasion had been orchestrated by Wynne and Sir William Carew disguised as independent electors. Meetings. Butler attended Lichfield races in September to meet with Wynne and other Jacobites, who were greatly pleased when they learnt that Charles Edward Stuart, James Francis Edward Stuart's eldest son, would lead the invasion. Although not a written agreement, the arrangements were based on James Francis Edward Stuart abdicating the crown to Charles, and according to a French source this had been a precondition for French support. Butler returned to France in October and had an audience with Louis XV, who said he was satisfied. The next month Amelot told Semple officially that Louis XV was resolved to restore the House of Stuart, and plans for a French invasion began. The Declaration of King James was signed by James Francis Edward Stuart on 23 December 1743 and was to be published in the event of a successful French landing. James also signed a separate declaration for Scotland, denouncing the pretended union. William MacGregor of Balhaldy gave Charles Edward Stuart in Rome the drafts of these declarations and requested he leave immediately for France in disguise. On 8 February 1744 Charles arrived at Paris, and during February and March he was with the French invasion force. Maurice of Saxony had between 12,000 and 15,000 French troops at Dunkirk ready for a landing in Essex. A declaration was drawn up for Maurice, declaring that Louis XV had no territorial designs on England and had imposed no conditions on King James. The rivalry between France and England was due only to the Elector of Hanover and were not in the interests of England. Furthermore, Maurice's troops would be withdrawn as soon as a Stuart restoration occurred, and commerce would bring mutual prosperity. However, François de Bussy, a senior clerk in the French Foreign Office, informed the Duke of Newcastle of the plans in return for £2,000. The message was decoded on 14 February, and Bussy had named the Duke of Beaufort, Lord Barrymore, Wynne and Cotton. On 15 February George II told Parliament that a French invasion was planned, helped by disaffected persons from this country, and the House of Commons passed a loyal address by 287 to 123. On 24 February a storm scattered the French fleet under Admiral de Roquefort and the British fleet under Sir John Norris. That same day arrests of suspected Jacobites took place. The planned invasion was cancelled by the French government. In April Parliament passed an act outlawing correspondence with James Francis Edward Stuart's sons. In Scotland, the association was a group of Jacobite noblemen similar to the Duke of Beaufort's circle. These included the Catholic Duke of Perth, his uncle Lord John Drummond of Ferntower, Lord Lovat, Donald Cameron of Lochiel and Lord Linton, with John Murray of Broughton an intermediary between the Highlands and the Lowlands and linking the association with the House of Stuart. In spring 1744 Charles Edward Stuart sent Balhaldy to England on an intelligence mission. Balhaldy reported that the English Tory Jacobites wished for Charles to come as soon as possible. On 24 July Charles wrote to Louis XV, saying he had been informed that England could be retaken without civil war as it was stripped of soldiers. In August he met Murray of Broughton at Tuileries Palace, who told him he would not get the support of more than 4,000 Highlanders and that he must drop his plans to come to Scotland. When Murray said French backing was extremely unlikely given the defensive position in Flanders, Charles replied that he was determined to come the following summer to Scotland, though with a single footman. In early 1745 the association wrote that it objected to a Jacobite rising if it was not supported by 6,000 French soldiers. However, Lord Linton was unable to find a safe way of transporting the letter to Charles. Charles went to Paris again in defiance of a French government ban of his presence there, determined to go to Scotland to force the French to back him. As Colonel John William O'Sullivan wrote, the prince being dissatisfied with the treatment he had from the court of France, and finding the French ministry had no real design to reestablish the king, was resold at any rate, to try what his presence could do among his friends at home, without any other succor, and imagining at the same time, if he could come to make a head, and have the least good success or advantage, would engage the French court to send him a real succor. John Murray's arrival at Paris confirmed, as it is said, HRH's in this resolution, and assured him, as I am told, the king's friends would receive him with open arms, and he did not even doubt but they would surprise all the fortes and castles of Scotland. WCH would procure him arms and ammunition, and by those means would be master of Scotland without being obliged to draw a sword.